I'd like to ask you this question. So how has being realistic and responsible kept you from the life you dreamed of? How has being realistic and responsible kept you from the life you've dreamed of? Sometimes the only way that you can get through is to have a breakthrough is to defy logic, and the logic's in your head. The greatest weapon, the greatest thing the enemy uses against you is, sometimes, see, whenever you blame a situation, whenever you blame the devil, whenever you blame that, all you're doing is shifting responsibility. It's like the guy that says, I don't know, means I don't want to deal with that. That's all it means. I don't want to think about it. So let's look at that question again. How has being realistic and responsible kept you from the life you dreamed of? I got in business when I was 22 years old. How many of you know my story? Have you been here before and heard this? A couple of you? I don't want to tell it again, but I got in business when I was 22 years old, and it wasn't because I was a genius. It wasn't because I was really smart. It was an opportunity. And I stepped into the opportunity that 8 other guys refused to step into. Were offered the same thing. And it wasn't about, it was a concrete business. It wasn't about concrete. I was in business 28 years, and I still don't know how to make concrete. It wasn't about concrete. It was about leadership. It was about setting an example. I had 360-some employees. And at the same time, I had a church of 400 people. So the two things were going on simultaneously. The thing was about leadership. And God has put the mantle of, when in Genesis 1, when he said that we were to dominate and rule and subdue the earth, he gave us authority to walk in dominion. Any time man does not walk in dominion, he becomes a needy person. And so now his prayers change because he needs something from God, when God had given him the authority to rule and to reign. Am I in the right place? So, anyway, back to my story. I built all this up. I had all these things going on at the same time. We were doing missions at a church, business, farms, whatever. And this year, in January, I gave a New Year's message that was, I thought was really good. And in the message, I used a story about this Buddha that was in Indonesia that had been sitting out in a temporary shelter, and they wanted to make this, this place for it where they could move this Buddha into for people to worship. All right, so it had been in a temporary shelter. They wanted to make a permanent place. So after 20 years, they had this place, this temple built, and when they went to move the Buddha, the plaster cracked. And as they went to look, here under that plaster was a 13-foot solid gold Buddha statue that weighed 5 tons. 5 tons of solid gold, and all they do, all these years, it had been plaster. And what happened was the warring tribes, the town, to protect their wealth, had plastered this Buddha so that warring tribes wouldn't find the wealth. And that's been the condition of the church. It's been plastered over, slapped on, put down, and the enemy has told us stuff, and actually the world has trained us to believe that we're always in lack, that, this whole thing where we end up being needy to God. And so I ended up the message saying, this is the year that God's going to crack your plaster. I never dreamed that message was for me. I left. I was feeling pretty good about the message. I went on a cruise, And so we started, we sailed all the way down to Barbados, and it's a great, I'm having a great time, and life's good. In Barbados, there was a college student we had had worked with, and she was a Barbadian. She had come to the university there in our town, so we had, she was a believer. So she took us around. As I'm getting back on the cruise, right? We're at the end of the line, and now it's a day-and-a-half sail back to Puerto Rico, where we're going to fly home. As I go to get on the boat or the ship, I see a picture of my living room. And I don't know what you call this, if it's a vision or I don't know. It was a bad experience, whatever it was. I see a picture of my living room, and I see the chair on which I always sat. And I felt like that is your tomb. Man, I'm going to tell you, I ended up from having a great cruise to being in a funk. And after the cruise was over, I get back home. I dreaded going home. I never realized till August of this year that I had never sat in that chair the whole year. I avoided that thing like a plague, all subconsciously. I didn't even realize it. It wasn't like I was trying to not sit there. In August, my wife mentioned to me, said, "You've never sat in that chair this whole year." I go, "Yeah." So anyway, I'm in this funk, and I suddenly realized I didn't know this, but a prophetic guy told me that Bob Jones had said to him once that when you see a chair, your chair in your dream or like in a vision or whatever, like happened to me, it means change your mind or change the way you think. And so God was after my thinking. The very thing that being plastered over, being slapped on, whatever, because when I grew up, if you know my story, I grew up, I stuttered all the time. When in high school, I couldn't hardly talk, because I was so inferior. And I had in my senior year, I went to a different school, and I got a breakthrough. And I went from an introvert to an extrovert that year, and by the time I was 22, I was in business. Everything changed. And now the Lord's saying, you got to change the way you think. You got to change. You've done all these things in life, but now you got to change. And I powdered around for almost a month. And suddenly I realized that everything was going to change if I ended up getting a coach. Someone to help me and someone to hold me accountable, because something wasn't right in the way I was thinking. Something wasn't working. Even though I'd been very successful and made millions and gave away millions, there's something wrong that I was stuck in a place. I think someone brought up today the book Halftime. I was in halftime, and it was becoming a grave. And so I went to, I checked around, and I found a coach. I actually ended up with 3 different coaches, one in Pennsylvania, one in South Carolina. This guy named Dennis McAtee. I don't know, is he here? He comes here sometimes. Dennis McAtee in South Carolina, and also a friend in New Mexico. And they started to show me things about my life, like about the second time I was in the one in Lancaster, third time I guess. He says he brings out some chopsticks. He said, "Now some people eat with these, but you're not going to eat with them. I'm going to give you a business card." And I had a friend go along, just so you know, so they couldn't take advantage of him. I had a friend go along, Anyway, and he said, "I want your friend to hold this. I want you to take this business card." You know how thin a business card is. And he says, "When you discover who you are, that business card will go straight through that chopstick." I'm like, "Yeah, right, And so I'm standing there, and I take this business card, and the harder I tried, the worse it got. I would bend the card. It would do one of those rough tears, and it was just, I was getting really frustrated. And finally, he hit the sweet spot of what the issue was in my life, and he wrote it on a piece of paper, and he put it on the floor. He said, "Now, go for that." And that business card hit that chopstick, and the chopstick exploded, and the business card didn't have a dent in it. I don't know what they call that, quantum physics? Some weird was going on. But you see, here's the problem. When obstacles get in the way, when you take your eye off the goal or the Lord, all you see is obstacles. You know, as fast as I was coming towards that stick to try to break it, the truth was I was actually slowing down, prepared to meet the obstacle, which was stopping my momentum. Okay, so later, I had two of those experiences this year. Later, I was in a meeting in Texas, and this guy was talking, and he has a board. He has a 1-inch board, which is what, probably 7/8. And he said, I'm going to have someone hold this, and you need to put your hand straight through the board. Ooh, that's going to hurt, you know. And so I'm like, so here's what I did. I studied the board. I'm looking at the grain. I leaned back to my wife, and I said, listen, here's how it is. You see how that grain runs right there? If you hit it at that place, it's going to break. So I got back, and I hit that board, and all I did was push the holder backwards. And I saw other big guys, man, they were just putting everything into it. Same thing. All of a sudden it dawned on me. If you focus on the board, you can't go through the board. And so I focused on the lady's shoulder behind the board, like she was holding it like this. And I looked at this shoulder, and I said to her, I'm going to hit your shoulder. She said, go ahead. And that board just shattered as you went right through it. See, what's holding us back is we are focused on the wrong thing. And in order to get a breakthrough, you have to see past the obstacle. You see, when obstacles get in your way, and if you approach the obstacle like it doesn't exist, one or two things happen. The obstacle either diminishes. What is fear? False evidence appearing real. That's what fear is. False evidence appearing real. So if you go into your fears, what happens is the thing diminishes, or you see a way around it. Think about David. He's running towards Goliath, right? He's running full speed. I mean, he hears this guy, and he goes, this guy's standing there, and all of the Israeli army's backing up because of one man's threat. And David said, that's not going to happen. He runs towards the guy. And here's the deal. Saul says, you can't go out there and fight unless you put on my armor. Can you imagine him going and trying to even move that sling with an arm on? You can't go on anybody else's experience or anybody else's thought. It's the word from the Lord. And I'll get to that. But anyway, so as he runs towards Goliath, there's an armor bearer in front of Goliath who probably has a shield as big as David. But you know, when you run towards it, you will find the opening to destroy that thing in front of you, or that thing actually diminishes. As he ran towards this Goliath, he sees the little place in the helmet that he can take him out. And he's so flexible, he's so free, he doesn't have any baggage on him, and he just lets her go. I'm telling you what, we're coming into a season, a time where God's going to show you an opening, and if you have what it takes to step into that opening, it will destroy the thing that's been holding you back. And that's why we're going to see this tremendous release of wealth, and it's going to cause a massive revival, and systems of the earth are going to crumble before the presence of the Lord and the wisdom that God has put in you.